Hello and welcome to the 2022 Within Summit. My name is Jamie Singletary and I am the Director of Alumni and Family Programming. And I am here to introduce our lovely speaker today, my colleague, Rebecca Brown, who is our Chief Clinical Officer. And today she is going to be presenting on internal family systems to deepen intuitive eating practice and therapeutic growth. Throughout Rebecca's presentation, we will have the chat open for you to share any comments, concerns, and questions, and she will answer those questions at the conclusion of her presentation. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we will talk about intuitive eating principles. We'll connect them with internal family systems, philosophies, and that's where I'll spend a little bit more time. We'll discuss the ways that the two complement one another, and then we'll go into understanding how protector parts under the lens of internal family systems may become activated in our work with clients in practicing the principles of intuitive eating, and how IFS can help us to increase compassion for the parts that become activated or resistant, understand why the parts exist and their functionality, how to reconnect with the healthy self, and how to facilitate growth in our clients, especially when they're activated and triggered in their growth process to start to live the principles of intuitive eating. I always like to know a little bit more about the person that's speaking and why I might want to invest an hour of my time with them. So like Jamie said, I have the privilege of being the Chief Clinical Officer here at Within. I've been a practicing therapist since 2005. I'm a certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor. I've been certified in intuitive eating since 2017 and have done basic and advanced training in internal family systems. I also identify as a recovered clinician, and in my commitment to showing up in self today, which is something we'll talk a little bit more about from the lens of IFS, I want to introduce not only this picture of myself, but also this picture of myself. So in doing this practice, it keeps me a little more grounded. This is a shot that I took this morning in the wee hours of the morning to one of my teenage sons, who we love to exchange goofy pictures with. And so this is my commitment and practice to all of you, to be here in myself and not being presenting to you today to you from a manager, from a part that wants to kind of keep me controlled and operating in perfection, but really being genuinely connective with you as the audience. So I hope you find that a little bit funny today. And I always like to present this slide, just reminding people that this is the space for growth. Anytime we're learning and growing from one another, I'm speaking today from my personal and professional experience, as well as from the experiences that the people that I've worked with. Now, these experiences, they won't be a perfect match for you. And these experiences are complete with the acknowledgement of the privilege that I've experienced in my life, both as a cisgender and cis-size female, educated female. And so I really encourage you today, just like we would encourage our clients, to take this presentation, to run it through your me filter, see what resonates, see what builds for you, and then just kind of leave the rest that doesn't. And trust that you are the expert to be, the best position to be the expert on you, and that we are all continuing to take in new knowledge, that's really what this conference is about for all of us, is taking in new knowledge, sharing from one another's experiences, and growing and stretching and learning. I'm going to assume today that many of us have exposure to intuitive eating, so I won't spend as much time here, but I do want to make sure that we review it for those of us that have a little less training than those that do not. So intuitive eating is a non-diet approach to food, to intake, to body, and to movement. And so instead of using external rules, it uses internal body signals to guide these things. And through that, it makes peace with psychological dissonance that exists in the body. And through all of it, promotes a healthy, trusting relationship with the self. So diets, in contrast, are external rules about how and when we should eat. So things like food groups that we aren't supposed to have, or timing. I relate things that I've heard from clients in the past, like no fat or no carbohydrates, skipping meals after certain times or before certain times because of these external rules, preferable ways, things to eat. For instance, somebody told me grapes are a better choice than raisins. And what external rules is that person operating from to have that frame of reference? Or the idea of, let's say, drink water when you're hungry. And really, as a culture, we're trained to rely on external cues to guide our intake and our care of ourselves. Our bodies are seen as things to control, things that need management. And even really our lives are set up to rely on external cues. So we might think about things like our lunch hour, or for maybe you have high school age children like I do, where the bell rings and that's the sound of telling us when we can eat. We may have things in our lives that are external signs that it's time for something in particular, like the movies. Many of us will say, oh, movie time is popcorn time. And our external environment really has a lot to do with telling us what things are good and bad. Even the words that we use can create that understanding of external view of what we should and should not do. Intuitive eating says, in contrast, that the body is wise, that the body contains all the wisdom that we need, and that the body naturally seeks well-being. It does not need to be controlled. It doesn't need to be pulled in a direction that it doesn't fit with us. That it will communicate its needs to us, and that we're naturally born attuned to these bodily needs, and that the external rules that are forced upon us are the things that make us lose connection with that internal knowing. But thankfully, intuitive eating really is about reestablishing that reconnection to ourselves and that internal wisdom. So I've done this presentation a few other times, and I have a lot of research that I like to go into, but knowing that it was an hour today, I'm going to skimp a little bit on the research and more so highlight practical things that you might be able to take away in your practice. But I do want to touch on the intuitive eating research, just because when I look at what some of that research is producing, it really validates the transformation that can take place in an individual when they start to listen and respond to their own internal wisdom. And time and again, I've seen that this process frequently leads to a deeper connection with the person's, not only their intake, their exercise, but it leads to a deep, rich trusting of the self. I'm thinking of one person in particular that I've worked with, that her goal was to move more into an intuitive eating space. But along that journey, she realized that she didn't trust herself to do anything. She didn't trust herself to make decisions about what was right for her time or what was right for her life. So much of that had to come on board while she was learning this process of intuitive eating. So that facilitated the growth of deeper trusting of herself and moving towards her own values and a life that felt really value driven for her. So we've talked about intuitive eating being led by internal cues, and I want to dig a little bit into this idea. There is a concept called interoception, and I've done a lot of reading and understanding about this concept because it is a term that demonstrates our ability to perceive that internal physical sensation and respond, and to accurately meet the need that interpret and meet the need that is arising from within our body. And interoception is connected with stronger mental health. So when we use this information from our body to get our biological and physical needs met, it facilitates a deeper connection through awareness and responsiveness to our body. These are the 10 principles of intuitive eating, and they're filtered by the ways that they support interoception. So they both improve awareness, as you can see here, by honoring hunger, respecting fullness, discovering the satisfaction principle, and understanding how movement feels in the body. And then they also work to remove obstacles. So these on this side are a little bit more of the things that might stand in our way, to be able to listen to our body and to respond to our body in a way that meets its needs. I wanted to leave this in here so that if you had questions or were interested in the same connection between interoception and mental health, that you could know where you might start to dig. This is an article that really was from an interoception summit, similar to what we're doing, where they really dug into the connection between interoception and mental health. And so the takeaway from that summit and from the research article that's cited below is that better interoception is associated with stronger mental health. And all of the things that go into that to make the connection between those two things are the awareness of the needs that our body has, being accurate when we're interpreting those needs, and then being responsive when we're hearing those needs. So this has this quote by Carolyn Costin, "Your healthy self will heal your eating disorder self," is one that so connects me to the ideas and the operating principles behind both intuitive eating and IFS. So this is going to be a really brief overview on internal family systems, some of the operating principles as far as IFS. IFS sees everything as parts to a whole, that in fact parts to a whole are natural, and that they occur everywhere. So this pen, if I can get it to show it to all of you, you probably have one in your hand similar. This pen is parts to a whole. This computer, the computer that's in front of you, the keys, the screen, those are all parts to a whole, and that this is natural and a productive and functional way that we function. But it also says that the system needs a leader, and that the self is in the best position to be that leader. It also says that all humans have a self, that to be human is to have a self, it's inherent. And that when the self emerges as the leader of the system, that parts can take their rightful place in the system of informing, but not taking the wheel and making decisions. More philosophy, the idea that system harmony can be achieved when the self leads, that again, parts can take their rightful place. That the self should be elevated and differentiated as more of the wise adult in the system. one of the beliefs that I really love, especially in eating disorder work, is that there are no bad parts. There are parts that are carrying out a function that they believe is helpful to the person. They believe that they are being fiercely protective, that they are operating in the person's best interest, and that we just need to understand them better and understand what they believe about the system. And also that parts are childlike. They arise from a time when we have a more elementary understanding of how systems work, and that the self is the wise parent in the group. So when the understandings of the parts can be realized through the self, then they can be run through truth. That all parts play a role, even when they appear dysfunctional. That extreme parts will often give rise to new parts that are seeking polarization to even them out. And that when parts are understood for the role that they play, for the functions that they carry out, for the protective mechanisms that they believe that they're taking on, that they can be understood and take a less extreme form. So ultimately, again, self-leadership is the goal. So the parts can trust the leader to make protective, proactive decisions and to support the well-being of the system. I'm a visual person, so I created this to help understand. This is an ideal situation where the self is elevated at the top, kind of like a boss or a leader, and that there are parts, firefighter and manager. I won't go into those. Those are a little bit more nuanced, but we have protector parts that function to keep the exiles down. We'll talk more about what exiles are too, but these really are, in a nutshell, they're just painful parts of us that can be triggered parts, that can contain ways that we feel really vulnerable. And so the protector parts manage the exiles to keep them from throwing off our system. But then in this diagram here, that if the self is elevated, that these parts can seek reassurance and care from the self. So you can see that the self is a very strong concept in IFS work. So I wanted to spend a little time here. The idea that we all have a healthy self. And this is an area where others have come back to ask questions about. So yes, in IFS, the belief is that we all have a natural, healthy self. Sometimes it's harder to tap into with some people than it is with others. There can be just many layers. And I love the metaphor of the school bus. The times when, is it yourself that's driving or is it a part? So many of us are eating disorder providers. Is the eating disorder driving the bus? And that the self is on the bus regardless. It's just, where are they in proximity to be able to drive the bus? We know that individuals are in self when they are able to demonstrate compassion, creativity, curiosity, connectedness, calmness, confidence, clarity, and courage. These being in self is not being judgmental of another part. It is often referred to as the I in the storm. And if you think back to this is self-leadership. The I in the storm is the firm security in the swirling going around you. And that all parts need to be able to tap in to the self to be able to take their less extreme form. So almost like the self is the wise parent, and that the parts are containing activated spots from earlier times in our lives where we felt less capable. There's a really awesome book by Richard Schwartz, who is the founder of ISF, who says the title is "You're the One That You've Been Waiting For." And I love that saying in IFS work to really help people understand the tendency to want to move towards others, being able to offer what we're looking for, but really having that self is the way that we have what we need inside of us at all times. And I like for therapists to also have this idea that self pulls self, that goofy picture that I shared with all of you. We can spend a lot of our time in manager parts because they feel more comfortable. They feel kind of like a facade. But when we are open and vulnerable, and when we are willing to be seen as how we are, when we do feel compassionate, when we feel confident, when we feel connected, we are naturally going to pull that from our clients and from one another. So it can be a really good tool for clinicians as well to be able to say, hey, am I operating in self right now? And if I'm not, what's coming up for me? And if I am I able to then pull that from my client as well? So this is an understanding of the exiles in the system of internal family systems. Exiles are often young parts. They've maybe experienced trauma, and I say big T, little t trauma. There are experiences that we have in childhood that we don't know how to handle, or that we're naturally egocentric around. And so our interpretation can be that we caused that, or we were the reason for that. And so they become trauma triggers or feeling triggers for us. And these are parts, I think about, it's kind of a silly example, but I think about the original Jurassic Park and how I don't think it was a mosquito, it was something similar, but I'll use mosquito, how the mosquito became encased in amber. And I almost think about exiles being that way too. They're just so painful. And they make us feel so out of control and vulnerable that they kind of get pushed. They get exiled away from us so we don't have to feel what they contain. So interestingly, they carry unwanted emotions. And so the system naturally wants to oppress, isolate, and outcast them. But in contrast and in paradox, like we might think of our clients as well, we all need to be heard. We all have a story to tell. It feels better to feel understood. So there's kind of this dance between an exile, a part of us that contains pain, wanting to be heard, but also the system wanting to oppress and forget about and push away. So these are protector parts, and this is where I won't go too into detail. After I've given this topic before, I think that I have found that this can make people feel a little bit more overwhelmed and get more into the weeds about, is that a manager or is that a firefighter? So I want you to know that those two terms exist, but I want you to think more about a pendulum. So managers are more so on the end of the pendulum as wanting to control, wanting to kind of keep things tight and orderly and have control over the way that things operate and keep exiles in line by that strict control. Firefighters, on the other hand, are more kind of responsive. They are more reactionary. So if a part starts to feel, they are at the ready with resources to distract, to take us to a different state of mind. This is where somebody might feel impulsive to act out or to numb, to do any of their coping behaviors that would just make them not have to feel. Dr. Dan Siegel said it best in his book, Mindsight, and I use this example frequently in treatment. He speaks of a river of well-being, and so you can see the river there that I have in the picture. He talks about the river of well-being flows straight through the middle, but on the sides are rigidity and chaos. And we can bounce off the sides to rigidity and chaos. And this is kind of how managers and firefighters function. They often run in conflict, and then they polarize and strengthen each other. And that internal polarization creates chaos and distress. Okay, so with that understanding, let's marry the two concepts together. So the complementary features between IFS and intuitive eating are, of course, interoception. They really both rely heavily on a deep connection with the self, with an internal knowing, with a comfort of that internal knowing, the trust, and the encouragement of the individual to become the expert of themselves. Oftentimes with IFS, the therapist's role really is to facilitate deeper understanding, but knowing that the client has everything within them that they need to know. What we're doing is helping them pull the puzzle pieces out to understand that better. So this is where I've really enjoyed the understanding of internal family systems, because in my experience, I have been met with resistance at times from patients moving into intuitive eating. This is really understandable because we're asking to really turn away from a lot of things that are pretty commonplace in our culture. So I love the understanding of IFS to help to understand that resistance and then to help move past it. So I think it's kind of twofold. It helps to not meet the client with resistance. Instead, if I'm operating in self, then I can approach that resistance with compassion and curiosity. That I can understand that if there's a big reaction from a client, that it's likely a part that's being activated, and that I can seek to understand that part and how that part functions and how that part believes, and what functional role that part believes that it's taking on in that patient's life. So these are some of my favorite ways to help a client connect back to self. So you can start with first validating. I see that you have a part of you that feels very strongly about blah, 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 whatever that is. But by using that word, a part of you feels this way, it also acknowledges that there is a part, or maybe a part, that feels another way. And it's really helpful to normalize this. I think at least once a day, I hear somebody say, a part of me wants this, but the other part wants that. So really just normalizing that a part of you can feel really strongly about something, but then asking the client to check in to see if there are any other parts that feel differently in them. This is probably the number one phrase that I use to understand and help people access is, what is the part's worst fear if it stopped doing its job? So the part believes, that they need to do something. Maybe it's restrict, or maybe it's binge. What does that part believe will happen to the person? And this is where you can get they know it would be fine. So if you can go with the worst fear, if that part stopped doing its job, you can really get at some of the core functionality. Also, working to understand how that part might feel about its job. How do you think that that part, what does the person think that that part would need to feel safe, or for it to take a different position or challenge its belief? A lot of times this is connecting in with feeling like there's trust with the self. What does that part need? How might that part get that need met? And this is where some of that healing work can come in. And I'm really oversimplifying right now, but I do want to show the power of the intervention when you really can understand and come at it from a framework of curiosity and of the deeper understanding. So helping the person to understand, if you could be with that part in self, how would you help to take care of that? How would you help that part to understand that it's cared for and safe? And then, of course, asking, and this is something I frequently do for myself as well, is if I asked myself to view that from self, would I feel any differently about it? So these are all questions that can really help facilitate some deeper reflection. Next, what I want to do is, and what we'll do for the remainder of the time that we have together, is we'll dig into the 10 principles of intuitive eating. And I have it framed so that it's kind of that pendulum effect. So we will reflect on what protector parts might be activated by some of the principles, and then how you might be able to explore that with compassion. So the first principle is reject the diet mentality. And where I have seen protector parts become activated is through not wanting to get rid of this because they feel like this is how I can be good. This is the investment that I have in this, in continuing to keep a diet mentality, is the belief that this is how I can be the person that I want to be, that these rules will fix me, they will cure me, that this is how I can be a person that I respect and love. That I am somebody who is out of control and I can only operate under this strict set of rules, or else I won't be under control. And that the manager part can also feel that the person is so terrible that the only way to keep themselves together is to follow these extreme rules. And really, they can be fed by cultural beliefs that good people do this and bad people do that. Where I've seen the other edge of the pendulum swing back in response to some very painful emotions and wanting to react, to numb, to extinguish those difficult feelings, are these feelings of kind of reactivity of like, oh, I can just never do anything right. I might as well go all the way. To really mess things up. Or that dieting can be a way to distract, to consume, to be all consuming so that other things don't have to be thought about. Another piece that is interesting is that eating disorders often go along with life transitions. I think about work in eating disorder work with individuals in middle life, and think about times of transition that are much less celebrated and much more in isolated experiences, and how often the diets go along with those life transitions. And maybe that's because it's a way to distract from the challenges of experiencing the transition. And then also the idea of diet bonding. So maybe some reactivity around wanting and needing to connect, and speaking that common language is a way to experience that connection. I wanted to dig just a little bit deeper on this one, especially because there can often, in my experience, have the most reactivity, almost like if I can help a person get over the speed bump of rejecting the diet mentality, then the rest of the work can be done. So I want to acknowledge some other parts that can become activated. And I see these parts as grieving parts. There often can be so much grief in letting go of the idea that so much time, money, energy, resources have been invested in this belief now that we're saying really is never going to deliver on what they thought it was going to deliver on. There's grief that's associated with that. There's pain that's associated with that. And there is grief in the idea that the kind of magical thinking that this thing that I might do, this thing that I can just, if I do it right, is going to change me in a way that will make me feel okay or acceptable or a person that makes me proud. Kind of ignoring the fact that human life is messy. It's messy to experience love and rejection and hurt and pain. And it's really alluring to hold a belief that cabbage soup will make that all go away. And there is work to accepting that the individual is not going to realize this kind of magic thinking that came from the belief that dieting was the conduit through which they would become the person that they want to be. And here I want to really consider the exile. This is a really particularly important part of the recovery journey. The reminder here that fat is not a feeling. And oftentimes when I say that to a client and we dig into that, that kind of this gentle idea of, okay, but fat's not a feeling. So what is the word that you're trying to replace there? And often it comes back to be shame, vulnerability, fear of rejection, feeling unworthy, and being hopeful to resolve and to not have to feel those things, believing that there is some magic armor to not having to experience those as human conditions. So I really here want to highlight the shared understanding of eating disorders being social justice issues, where some bodies are perceived as more valuable and worthy than others, and that this is rooted in restriction, driving eating disorders because of this idea of it being valuable because it can protect against these things. So in this principle, we're really asking somebody to let go of an illusion that their worthiness can be gained or enhanced, and that their vulnerability can be reduced by the magic of dieting. And there's a lot of pain to unravel around that and letting that go. And I think about the way that these messages can be conveyed throughout our culture and how prevalent they are. Okay. So the second principle is honoring your hunger. And the things that I've seen come up for individuals are experiences of it not feeling safe to be hungry, experiences of it not being safe to be full. And in childhood, what did it mean to be hungry? What did it mean to be full? And what experiences are linked to these states? And some reactivity around hunger and wanting to not feel maybe trigger points that come up are obviously eating disorder behaviors. Making peace with food. So protector parts are often hold beliefs about the types of people that they are linked to the types of food that they eat. I'm a good if I do these things, or I can atone for the bad things that I do if I do these other things. And I've also had people that have held a belief that they weren't as smart as, let's say, siblings, or they weren't their parents' favorite, but they were proud of the fact that they could avoid this thing, or they were always praised for their ability to do this eating disorder behavior that wasn't realized as an eating disorder behavior. So manager parts can hang on to that very tightly, the idea that I get a sense of validation from this and I don't want to let that go. Around the pendulum swing here is reacting, wanting to not feel the challenges that come with deprivation. And again, some more of the behaviors that we might see in eating disorder. It can be helpful to understand where did foods get their cherished or precious meaning and why? And on the other side of that, where did foods get their negative connotation? How was that learned? How did they learn that certain foods were okay and not okay? What were shameful experiences around foods or eating? And of course, what were traumatic experiences around food? The next principle, challenging the food police. So this is heavily where manager parts can come in. And I think when I do this presentation, I often think of people that I've worked with in the past that have had just such strong parts that come out of them, and understanding where those are coming from. I worked with a woman whose sister really was, sister's voice was a lot of her food police, even though it was never something that her sister said to her. It was a version that she saw of her sister in comparison to herself that made her feel very unworthy. And a manager part that said, you need to do these things all the same way that you believe that your sister does them, so that you can be as worthy as she is. And so she had a part that really contained the food police in her, and trying to control her vulnerability and trying to control her worthiness. And then the continuum flip on that is that what the hell effect. Like, if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm just not going to do it at all, or I'm going to do it deliberately wrong. Sometimes the firefighter part can grow reactivity to being tired of being controlled and having to swing to the opposite side for control. There's an interesting client that I worked with, not around eating disorders, but around homework. And she held some really strong ideas of perfectionism. And she was really struggling to get herself to do her homework. She had gotten into a stuck place and was procrastinating in a way that she felt like she couldn't control. And it really was a part that was saying, we need more downtime. I'm going to resist this perfectionism that you have, and I'm going to pull away from that, because I simply will not conform to those standards at all times. Sometimes the firefighter can want to feel good for a change, or can be acting on behaviors to numb guilt from managers. Respecting fullness. Protector parts can be activated in, again, not feeling safe to be hungry or full. What did these states mean? Sometimes we see that a super feeler or highly sensitive person come in here. They can be visceral feelings of it not feeling comfortable. There's a little bit more in the interoceptive research that I like to share about. I believe it's from Nancy Zucker, and I'm sorry, the name is Cynthia Bulick, who look at visceral interoception, kind of bodily and stomach, and tie it to discomfort and sensitivity to what's going on in the body, and interpreting that in ways that are inaccurate, and then looking to seek control within their lives or within their bodies to not feel that way. Sometimes the managers believe that there are states that should be avoided at all costs to protect against vulnerability. And sometimes it can feel very unsafe to feel that connected to the body. And again, eating disorder behaviors are often in response to some of these manager parts, and can contain a belief that they must distract from those inner sensations with behaviors. Discovering the satisfaction factor. This is an interesting one as well, too, when working with individuals. A lot of times this can center around worthiness. So here we're asking somebody to move towards experiencing what it feels like to have enough, to be partaking in joyful experiences. And what I've seen come up is ideas of not being somebody who deserves to take a break, not deserving to take a break until everything is done. And oftentimes that becomes a never-ending list. That they don't deserve to be experiencing or enjoying the experience. Who do they think that they are to indulge, to take care of, to prioritize? A lot of worthiness circling around. I find my worth in caring for others. And what would have to change in order to prioritize themselves. And a lot of times asking about who they've experienced as selfish or as self-indulgent can help to reveal the origins of that part and understanding it from a deeper lens. The managers in response to satisfaction, discovering the satisfaction factor can be only being allowed to take a break in times of eating. And so the firefighter can come out and really utilize that time to say, this is the only time when I can take a break. This is the only time the manager will allow me to do that. Might be doing things in secret or wanting self-care until you feel completely, or waiting for self-care until you feel completely depleted and totally justified. Kind of more of that what the hell effect, except for in a different way. Waiting until the person is completely depleted and then needing to kind of let go of all obligations. Approach emotions with kindness is another principle. So managers often will want to avoid emotions at all costs, to feel that they are not safe. Maybe that emotions are seen as weakness, or the idea that if you do move into emotions, that you'll be completely overtaken, that you won't be able to find yourself or stand back up again. And that the pain of the emotion will be far more than that can be bared. The person doesn't have the resources to take care of them. This is where we can see a lot of beliefs about feared weaknesses or feared vulnerabilities come up from parts. And protector parts might utilize behaviors in trying to avoid emotions through avoidance strategies, shopping, gambling, behavior use, all of those things. Behavior swapping, maybe shopping for a substance use disorder, or looking for ways to feel without vulnerability. So this is where maybe things like horror movies or really gory movies might come in, or even pornography can come in. Looking to feel, desire to feel without truly having to be vulnerable. Respect your body. Protector parts that can become activated here might be beliefs that they are not worthy, that kind of, again, going back to that reject giant mentality. You aren't worthy now, but if you change X, Y, and Z, you'll become worthy. beliefs about if we just stay on this strict idea or path, that life will be wonderful. That I am inherently unacceptable. I cannot be acceptable as I am, and therefore, to be acceptable, I must change. And again, this is where a lot of the cultural conditioning can come in here, that only thin bodies are desirable. And I have legacy burdens here. I think you guys just all came off of the talk with Dr. Wendy Oliver Pyatt, and I believe that she spoke about epigenetics, and that's what I'm referring to here, kind of the legacy burdens that we carry from our generation to generation. Protector parts also can respond in polarized ways by using behaviors to constantly numb the ongoing criticism, again, of polarized parts. And maybe sometimes carry beliefs that I'm so bad, or I'm so unworthy, or I'm so unlovable that I deserve these bad things that I bring onto myself. Exercise, feel the difference. So this is a principle that really talks about moving into letting joyful movement happen. And so this can really be unraveling protector parts that have a lot of strong beliefs about undoing bad behavior, or what exercises are things that should be done, or the best things to do, beliefs about being weak, or if they do not engage, or that only certain exercises count as exercise. And then swing over to the other side, firefighters might use exercise for distraction, right? Might use exercise to numb, and I've seen people have painful and shameful memories with movement, and with their experiences linked in around exercise. And so they may not exercise in protest. So this is the last principle. It is honor your health. And for those of you who don't do a whole lot of work with intuitive eating, it's always funny to me because when most people look at this, they want to start with honor your health. And of course, that is deliberately placed by Evelyn Tripoli and Elise Resch, deliberately at the end of the principles, because all of these other really facilitate the ability to honor the health in a way that is really attuned to what the body needs, and not letting that get all kind of glommed on top. So some of the protector parts that I've seen activated here are there's no time. What would I have to give up? Maybe it is work or caring for my family, and those things might make me feel guilty, or they might be the things that make me feel worthy. The fear of being selfish, the fear of if I'm not all good, then I am all bad. And the protector parts sometimes only acknowledging physical health instead of the large repertoire of emotional, intellectual, and social health that go into the totality of health. Protector parts might swing to the opposite side and rebel, feel tired of having to be good all the time, feel like life might be boring or ruminative when it just surrounds health and some of those ideals of health, or may really love the chase of the newest idea of what health is. Maybe it's this book or that book or that book. They might find distraction and numbness through those pursuits. So what would they need to let go of in order for the self to be prioritized? And then what does that bring up in them? Okay, so Just a couple of final thoughts here. Shifting the relationship between food, body, and movement from the external control to internal wisdom is really transformative to the soul and to the relationship with self. Because the 10 principles can activate and challenge protector parts, it's important to know how to help individuals explore this dissonance and what comes up for them, and to have tools to work towards inner harmony. I'm going to leave this slide up as we answer any questions that maybe have come up. If you want to know more about either one of the two topics that I talked about today. And then I'm also going to drop my email in the chat because I really love to be a resource and to have the eating disorder community be resourceful to one another. So if there's any ways that I can be helpful to you, please take advantage of my email address.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that very informative presentation. We do have a question in the chat. Are you able to see that question?
Yes, on neurodivergent individuals.
Yes.
Actually, this was a topic for myself and a colleague just over the few other days. Especially autism spectrum disorder. This is not necessarily they may not have the privilege and the luxury of utilizing intuitive eating in the same way that somebody without those challenges might. And I want to acknowledge that. I'm going to read the rest of your question. Are there ways to provide intuitive eating-based care in an affirming and safe ways, given that there may be some assumptions based on neurotypical experiences that might not align with the same experiences of neurodivergent people? In the work that I've done, I've seen this work best in more of a maybe more of a prescriptive way that does not necessarily align completely with the intuitive eating concepts. But I've also been able to see some of those principles be worked in with different individuals in different ways. So I know that that's not necessarily a clear-cut answer, but I do want to acknowledge the limitations for a neurodivergent individual and being able to be more flexible in some of that.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, and we only have 2 minutes left. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, Rebecca, and to thank our attendees for joining us today. It has definitely been a fun-filled day, full of information, full of resources. As Rebecca mentioned, her information is in the chat. Please feel free to leave your comments, your questions, your feedback. Don't forget to check your dashboard. I feel like I say it over and over again, but I need to just remind you all, please do not forget to check your dashboard. You will have a survey for this session, and it will also be the place where you will download your CE certificate. This actually concludes our CEs for today. We have one more day left for our Within Summit, so we hope to see you all again tomorrow. And for those of you that will be joining us for dinners in your respective locations, we hope that you have a wonderful time and be safe. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.